In 1981, a 20-year-old left-hander with a funky windup and a confounding breaking ball burst onto the scene and created a phenomenon so rare it ultimately bore his name, Fernando Mania.
Valenzuela is great. I love him. The Dodgers are #1.
He's the greatest, and I think everybody here has Fernando fever.
Fernando Valenzuela did not possess a blazing fastball, but his screwball, thrown by pronating his elbow to create movement in the opposite direction, befuddled hitters.
Valenzuela delivers, screwball, got him swinging.
His delivery added to his allure. Fernando would lift his arms up over his head, then briefly turn his gaze to the bill of his cap for striding towards home plate.
In there, strike 3, and he has struck out the side.
Fernando started opening day for the Dodgers in 1981 and went on to win each of his first 8 starts, 5 via shutout, posting a 0.50 ERA to begin the season. He ultimately became the first player, and still the only, to win Rookie of the Year and Cy Young in the same season. Although others came before him, Fernando Valenzuela established himself as the first Mexican superstar in the major leagues. Starring in LA made him an icon.
He was their hero, which was great. They needed a hero, and he represented their country in the highest degree of class, dignity, and character.
Fernando made 6 All-Star teams throughout his career, eventually becoming more workhorse than wonderkid. He led the NL with 21 wins and 20 complete games in 1986. And on April 27, 1990, in his final season with the Dodgers, he threw a no-hitter against the Cardinals.
Fernando Valenzuela has pitched a no-hitter.
After 5 additional stops, Fernando retired in 1997. He eventually returned to the Dodgers as a Spanish-language analyst for radio and TV broadcasts. In 2023, the franchise retired his number 34, a number no Dodger player had worn since he stopped playing.
Ladies and gentlemen, Fernando Valenzuela.
Good evening, y'all. Welcome to our Once Upon a Pastime series. I'm here with Mr. Doug. Doug, how the hell are you, sir?
Doing good. Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this one. So, Doug, you started watching baseball, I believe you told me around in 1973 at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is about the time I started watching baseball. Was right around Fernandomania. I kind of remember 81, but not really. But I remember hearing about him before I ever started really watching baseball. And I started really getting into baseball. 1982 was the first season that I can say that I was actually going in, diving in straight up for the Atlanta Braves and watching almost every game I could get my hands on. Not every game back then wasn't possible considering where I was living. But the big thing was knowing who he was and how damn good he was and how big of a following he had. And he was just unreal. And he was coming. So you got to realize in 82, I'm a little kid and he's coming off that incredible year, only person to ever win the Cy Young and the Rookie of the Year in the same season, first and only. And it was just an incredible ride to watch him. He was pretty dominant till about 86 or so and then kind of fell off. What was your take on Fernando? Because by then, you're 10 years into watching baseball. What was your take at the time?
At the time, I remember somebody just telling me, he goes, you've got to watch the Dodgers and this kid that is pitching for him. So we picked up. I remember because the Dodgers were playing the Reds and he pitched. And I'm like, who is this cat? He's this little, he doesn't even look like a baseball player when you look at him. And then you watch him pitch and you just watch this over-exaggerated lift your eyes. Looks like he's practically running into home plate kind of pitching style, and it just mesmerizes you because I had never seen a pitcher like that before. I'd never heard of anything like that before.
Yeah, his repertoire was really, really something else. There was a lot of things about Fernando Valenzuela that made him special. We're going to get into that in the entire episode. But his repertoire, I was looking at it, and one of the big things that jumped out at me, now this is a name. Someone by the name of Sandy Koufax, or very early in Fernando Valenzuela's career, said that what jumped off the page with him is that it's very rare that early in a career that a starting pitcher has that much control over that many pitches. And I jotted them down on what his repertoire was. He ended up having about 8 over his entire career, but he came onto the scene with 5 and then added 3 others later on in his career when his velocity was down on his 4-seamer. He added the cutter, right? And then he ended up throwing a 2-seamer at some point, but he wasn't very successful with it, so kind of threw that away. But all in all, his biggest thing was being able to hit his spots, and that screwball, man, that screwball, when I'm coming up watching baseball, that was the first guy I ever heard of that had a screwball, and I wanted to know what the hell it was. So I remember looking it up and, some book in the library, and well, there was no screwball in that book because it was a fairly it wasn't necessarily a new pitch, but the term screwball was fairly new. And I had an old ass book. They used to call it the fadeaway years ago, turn of the 20th century. It was called the fadeaway. A lot of pitchers use the fadeaway, but the difference with his screwball and other screwball / fadeaways is the way he contorted his arm. He was a left-handed pitcher, and he contort his arm. What's amazing to me? I know he had shoulder problems later in his career, but how did that guy not end up with Tommy John? Right? I mean, what the hell is that?
I'll tell you how he didn't up with Tommy John is the fact that he understood how to throw it. Always remember, for anybody out there who's interested, is the fact that only a left-hander can throw a screwball effectively. Right-handers can't throw it. That's why, when you look at some of the greatest left-handers, one that comes to mind is a guy named Huff from the New York Giants. He threw a screwball. He was probably one of the first to throw it effectively as a left-hander. And It was Bob Castillo that showed him how to throw that ball, and he picked it up. It's not, his size, the way he was, his arm strength was as natural as, as rain and sunshine to throw that ball. But always remember, with his screwball, he didn't throw it the same way that you would see it in a book, how they would tell you how to throw it.
Yeah, the fact that he was always contorting that arm, and you would think that would lean to a batter sitting up there not going to swing at it. But I read many quotes over the last week, getting prepared for the show, and one of the things that was consistent was they kept talking about how the catchers that caught him said he didn't even have to have great control, and he would still get 10 to 12 swing and misses on that pitch every single start because you felt like the ball was never going to get there. And then when it finally got there, it faded away from you if you were a right-handed hitter. You didn't typically throw it to left-handed hitters because you're cutting right into their swing. What it was someone who was a left-handed pitcher who was trying to find a way to keep the guys from the right-hand side of the plate from just digging in and barreling them up because he never threw with great velocity. His Fernando Valenzuela at his peak was very low 90s fastball, but typically high 80s to low 90s is about a 3 to 4 mile an hour. And it's really sketchy back then because they didn't have the technology that we do now, but that's about where they placed it at. And then as he got later in his career, he was high 80s, but he always had the curveball. He had the screwball. He threw the changeup, the sinker. The sinker, he ended up developing a 2-seamer off of that, but it wasn't, like I said, he didn't have a lot of success with the 2-seamer. So he pretty much it was the 4-seam, later on the cutter, and he did have the slider. And the slider was supposed to combat the fact that if you're looking at this straight ahead, if the screwball's going like this away from you as a right-hand batter, the slider is going to come in. But once again, you're not throwing the slider with that arm twist. To me, I'm like, man, the moment I see your elbow go, I don't even think I'm swinging unless there's 2 strikes. But easier said than done.
The interesting thing, too, the reason he could do that, too, is because when he threw that screwball, you traditionally, I wish I could show everybody what I mean. When you throw traditionally, you've got your one finger covering the lace. He would take 2 fingers and hold it when he contorted, and by doing so, he was able to hide that pitch, considering the other types of pitches that he could throw would keep batters off balance on what they would anticipate him throwing as well, too.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, so if you think about the Dodger history, because I got a clip I want to play for you. So if you think about the Los Angeles Dodger history and the fact that they came from Brooklyn, and in 1951, Chavez Ravine was a very heavily populated Mexican Latino neighborhood. Now, there were others, Chinese immigrants that were there, and Italians, but very highly populated on the side of the not just Mexican Americans, but Latinos that were coming in. And the city of Los Angeles bought up the area to build what at the time was supposed to be basically a housing, not quite housing project, but it was supposed to be a development of neighborhood. And the promise was that when they built that up, that everyone who was pushed out was going to be allowed to get a very affordable home back in. Now, that was 1951. In 1953, a new mayor gets elected, and the mayor ends up cutting a deal when the Dodgers decide, when the Brooklyn Dodgers make it known that they're looking for a new city. He cuts a deal to bring the Dodgers in by selling that plot of land at a much lower rate than what it was going for, because they wanted to get the Dodgers into Los Angeles. They wanted a baseball team. It wasn't necessarily that they specifically wanted the Dodgers, but they wanted the baseball team. So there is a belief at that point. So we're talking about going into the 1960s, right? So we're talking about late 50s, 1960s. So we're talking about a very short period of time overall, just under 25 years that this happens. And then all of a sudden, Fernando Valenzuela comes on the scene in 81. There has been this narrative that a lot of the Mexican Americans did not want to go see the Dodgers because of what happened in the Chavez Ravine deal.
Yeah,
I got a clip from a buddy of mine, Rich, who's done sports radio out in the Las Vegas area for years, and big Dodger fan, and he is a Mexican American, and he grew up in that area. And I did want to play this clip because he gives a different side of it, a different perspective. And I did want to play this clip because when Fernando passed, that was the big thing that everyone was saying, was that, he brought all the fans back. He had a different perspective living in that area as a Mexican American at that time. And here is the clip.
Hey, I wanted to elaborate on the impact that you're hearing people say that the Dodgers didn't have any Hispanics going to games in 1981. Now, here's where I'm going to disprove everybody. All right. They say because of the Palo Verde incident where everybody got thrown out of their houses and so forth, that people didn't appreciate the Dodgers. Look, that was in 1955, 54, 53, whatever year it was. That was almost 30 years earlier. So really, that impact, look, it is very few people that probably had that impact at that time in 1981. This is already almost 30 years later. So I'm not discounting that. I'm sure some people felt that and didn't go to Dodger games because of that. And really, it's not that many people. So years went by when Fernando came. I can guarantee you, me and my friends were already going to Dodger games out of Franklin High School, and guys at Wilson and Lincoln and all these schools around Dodger Stadium. We're all going to Dodger games. So what I'm saying to you is that when Fernando came, if anybody had a qualm with the Dodgers, they probably put it aside and said, hey, I want to go see this guy pitch. But that's very few people. It really is. So I think my good friend Rick Lozano, who was with Eyewitness News at the time, probably saw the whole thing develop, and I never felt like there were no Hispanics at Dodger games. Were there more when Fernando pitched? Yes. I'll agree with that. But as for not attending, that's not true. So maybe it was true in the early 70s, in the 60s, because I also attended at that time. We had season tickets for years. So I did see an impact and a difference in the 80s, where there were more Hispanics going to games. But the whole city of LA had changed at that time, and I think people would agree that the city itself changed. And so the impact for the Dodgers, even the Angels, the impact is showing at that time in the 80s. Again, I think there's a few people who may run with that and say, oh, nobody was going to the games until Fernando came. It's not true. Fernando's impact was tremendous, and like I said, it was worldwide, and the Hall of Fame needs to look at that. All right, a worldwide person who affected many people. I think that's a good thing, and the game of baseball.
Okay, so that was Rich's take, and he played professional baseball. He's a big Dodger fan. Not just growing up, but continues to be a big Dodger fan. I've been on his show a few times out in Las Vegas, but I wanted to give that side of it because he believes that there were fans going there, and he saw it, and he knew about it, and he grew up in that community. So he's not buying the fact that what made Fernando Valenzuela such a big deal was because he was the first. He wasn't the first Mexican American to play baseball. He was the first to become a superstar, and he did it overnight, and he did it in Los Angeles, which is right next to Mexico. And oh, by the way, he won a World Series that year. So, I mean, he was the cream. For people who weren't around back then, he was the toast of the town. If it wasn't for Magic Johnson, he would have been the toast of the town back in the 80s in Los Angeles. What say you?
Oh, absolutely. And I liked how he talked about that, because I too have an experience. One of my teachers in school at the 1981, he was a Mexican American from Los Angeles, and he was a fervent Dodgers fan. He talked about growing up as a kid, loving the Dodgers, and talking. He used to talk about when he was a kid, he'd bicycle home down the street, East LA, and you knew that the Dodgers were playing at home because you could hear every window was open and every TV was on, and you could practically game just pedaling down the street. So I can reaffirm what he's saying as far as that goes. I think the thing about Fernando that becomes a really big deal is, and we alluded to, because he doesn't look like a player. He looks like people like you and me. Right. And kids growing up, they see that. And you don't have to be from Mexico or LA to see that. I saw it growing up in North Carolina, other friends, Florida, everywhere, of all different races, saw that. And it's like, if he can play baseball, maybe I can play baseball too.
It's very close, though it's much different in certain ways. But the best way I can describe it, if you're growing up now and you didn't experience the Fernando Mania, it was the first guy that was like a Shohei Ohtani, right? In today's game, where he took an entire nation, an entire culture, and brought them to the sport of Major League Baseball. They were playing baseball in Mexico. Don't get me wrong. They've had Mexican leagues down there for years. In fact, Fernando's in the Mexican Baseball Hall of Fame, and I was looking it up. It actually began, I believe it was 1934. Now, he wasn't inducted till 2014. I'd like to know what the hell took so long for that, but whatever. they did get him in, and I guess that's the important part because they got him in before he passed, so he was able to enjoy that. But they had been playing professional baseball down in Mexico for years, but he was the first one to go kick the door in. Right? It's kind of like the Tiger Woods effect with golf.
Yes.
Shohei Ohtani. It's kind of like, we're all too young to remember this, but it's kind of like what the Bambino and Babe Ruth with the Italian community brought to the New York Yankees, because he was larger than life, and that's what I think of when I think of Fernando Valenzuela. Is he was larger than life. By the way, the backdrop that you're looking at right now in the background on our show, that is the scoreboard going into the ninth inning of Fernando Valenzuela's no-hitter that took place much after the peak of his career. It took place in 1990. His peak really ended around 86 because of shoulder injuries. Real quick, I do want to give for people who are not familiar with it, I want to give a quick bio. 6-time All-Star, won the World Series in 1981. At the same time, he won the Cy Young. He won the Rookie of the Year. Once again, that's never been done before. In 1986, he was very narrow lost. He came in second in the Cy Young to Mike Scott. And there was a lot of argument back and forth if that was the right call. A lot of it had to do with the fact that Mike Scott and the Astros went to the playoffs to face the Mets, and the Dodgers were left out. But for folks who were around then, Mike Scott was a badass in 1986, so it's not like it was given to him, right? In fact, I can't tell you how many times I've watched the rerun of the 1986 NLCS Game 6 extra innings affair between the Astros and the Mets to send the Mets to the World Series, because I always have the Major League Baseball channel on, not MLB TV, what y'all are thinking, but it's the rerun channel on Pluto. And there's they just rerun games all the time. That's one of the ones that they rerun a lot, I think, because the damn thing took 6 hours to play, and they just go, screw it, this will take up the afternoon, we'll put it in there. But in 86, when he came in second in the Cy Young, he won the Gold Glove Award. So that's not nothing either. He's a 2-time Silver Slugger Award, and Tommy Lasorda would frequently put him in as a pinch hitter because he had 10 home runs in his career. How about that? Batted .250 in his career for a pitcher. Hell, that's 30 points higher than the Atlanta Braves' current shortstop hits. So I mean that's something right there. And then he was the MLB strikeout leader, by the way, in 1981. In 86, where he came in second, he was the wins leader. Remember, back then, people cared more about wins in the pitcher's win-loss column because pitchers lasted longer, and it really was indicative of what kind of season they had. Nowadays, they get pulled after the 5th or 6th inning. Guys like Blake Snell win the Cy Young with poor records, but great numbers elsewhere.
Exactly, yeah.
And then the no-hitter, we'll probably get into that later on, was thrown on June 29th, 1990. The big thing about that, if we don't circle back to that, it was so they played out in Los Angeles that night. Just a few hours before that, it became the first time in modern baseball where 2 no-hitters were thrown on the same night. And the no-hitter that was thrown earlier in that night was none other than Dave Stewart against the Toronto Blue Jays for the Oakland A's. So, and remember, that ends up being a big thing because he eventually gets traded to Toronto. And you wonder if that had a lot to do with it, and he had great success with the Blue Jays as well. But, I kind of remember the no-hitter thing, but I wouldn't have been up late enough to have watched that in 86. I believe let me put it this way. I don't remember people talking about the Dave Stewart no-hitter as much as at that time. I was very well aware that Fernando Valenzuela had thrown a no-hitter because he was, like I said, he was one, though he never played on a team that I pulled for. He was a I wouldn't say an idol, but he was definitely a star in my eyes. You know, he was up there when I was growing up. If you told me to put a team together of guys that I grew up from when I was a kid, and they were larger than life to me, he's one of the starting pitchers in my rotation. There's no doubt about it. You know, he's going to be out there throwing, and Dale Murphy's going to be out there playing center field. And I would probably start from there. And I can think of others, but that's not the show today. But to me, that's the biggest thing. And I do want to talk about 1981 now, because that was really the year, his rookie year. Now, he had pitched a couple of appearances in September the year before 1980, but 81 he was put in the starting rotation, and Tommy Lasorda told him he was going to give him a go, and he actually thought he was kind of screwing with him, right? And he ended up hitting the ground running. His first 8 starts, he goes 8-0, 7 complete games. 7 complete games, he goes 8-0.
And 5 shutouts.
I'm sorry, to what?
I'm sorry, 5 shutouts in those 8. Well,
yes, 5 shutouts. And do you remember that? Like, did that stick out to you as a fan? Because at this point, how old would you have been? You'd been like in high school ish.
What's this? 80? Yeah, I'm about to go into high. 81. I'm about to go into high school. Yeah.
Okay. So, do you remember this? Like, was that a big thing?
Well, once you got on the map, you saw those games. You sat there with. As I said, I had never seen it, especially out of a rookie, out of this little guy. And you're just watching pitch after pitch, and it's like one masterpiece after the next, and you're almost just sitting there going, oh, he won't do that again. He won't do that again. He can't. Who finishes that many games in a row? And he just kept doing it and doing it. And that's the kind of like the Fernando. You start to get into this guy, and you can't help but want to watch it. It's just beauty on a baseball field. The whole world stuff, and I can't describe it any other way. It's just perfection, just sports at its finest.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things that took place during that time period too. So one of the things is you had the strike in 1981. And that's why when you see his numbers, 13-7 with a 2.48 ERA, won't go in all the other numbers, but they don't jump off the page at you. But it's because they lost several weeks in the middle of the season. And I don't recall this as well. I kind of came into the picture watching baseball when they came off the strike. And maybe my parents were making a big deal about, I don't know why, but in 81, in a very young age, I would have been just about turned, what grade would I have been in, around 3rd or 4th, whatever. But I was very aware that they were coming off the strike. So I don't remember anything too much before that, except, kind of hearing about certain players here and there, but not really diving into it. But the biggest thing to me, when you look at this numbers, and his numbers kind of fell off when they came back from the strike. And a lot of players did. So you took this big, huge. So I'm looking at their game log, and what it appears that his last game that he pitched in 1981 before the strike was June 11th. And then it was 2 months later, August 11th, that he came back.
Yes.
When we talk about those first 8 games in that stretch, I would put it on the screen, but it's really hard to see these box scores. So I'll just read them off real quick. He starts his career off on April 9th against the Houston Astros. Complete game shutout, ho-hum. Dodgers win it 2-0. He see how many strikeouts did he have in that one? He had 2 walks, and looks like that he had as I adjust the screen real quick, he only had 5 strikeouts. So honestly, he wasn't humming, and I was a little surprised by that. But this is where he gets cooking. He faces the Giants, another complete game, 10 strikeouts, 1 earned run. He faces the Padres, complete game, 10 strikeouts, shutty. He faces the Astros again. Now, this is the second time the Astros have seen him in a few weeks. And he goes complete game again, shutty, 11 Ks. Then his 5th game, the end of April, faces the Giants, 9 innings, another shutout, and 7 punchies. He goes into May, and I don't know what the hell is wrong with him in this game, but Montreal got a run on the board. Complete game, 1 run, 7 Ks. He ends up going, was it 8 of 9 of these were complete games, right? So
Yes.
he goes all the way. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was 8 games in a row that the first 8 games of his career, not counting the couple appearances that he had back in 1980, they were all complete games. And the only team that really kind of got to him was in that stretch. If you want to say they got to him, it was the next game, his 9th start, where he went up against the Phillies and they scored 4 runs. And then the Braves tagged him on May 28th in Atlanta, and he got pounded 3 2/3 innings, 7 earned runs. But I'd say some of that had to do with a couple of things. A, they had some pretty good swatters on that team in the 81 Braves. But the other thing is, remember, they were playing at the launching pad, and that ball would fly out of that damn park. And if he hung a couple of screwballs, good night, Irene, right?
Which he did against Mike Schmidt. So that game with the Phillies that you're quoting, remember, those are Phillies.
I mean, you're talking about Mike Schmidt and the Phillies in 81. They were the defending World Series champions, right?
Yeah.
Because they just come off beating it's escaping me. Was it the Royals?
Yeah. Yes. I believe it was.
Yeah. I just always remember it. It was just before my time, but what I've read and seen is that Tim McGraw's dad, closed that series. So you get into June, he's still pitching pretty darn well. He's at home against the Braves now, and it's a complete game, gives up just 2 runs and 11 strikeouts. So he had 2 matchups against the Braves in about a week, and whatever was wrong in the first one, he figured it out in the second one. And so he finishes that run against the Cubs and against the Cardinals. The Cubs, he got tagged, but it was in Wrigley. So, here he is. He's a rookie. He goes to the launching pad in Atlanta. He goes to Wrigley. I'm going to assume in June, the wind's blowing out, and he got slammed. And that was those were really the only 2 bad starts he had. Then we hit the 2-month strike. He comes back, and he faces Pittsburgh. We'll never see this again in our lifetime, most likely, Doug. This man pitched a complete game, 1 run, 7 strikeouts, 10 innings. He went all 10 innings. You don't see that anymore. Like that's not even discussed. And then he faces the Cardinals, goes 9, 8 strikeouts, and then he starts to fall off a little bit. I'm sure some of it was a fatigue. The other thing was the weird stoppage. He faces the Reds. He's in Cincinnati against the Big Red Machine. Well, it's the tail end of the Big Red Machine, but they hung a crooked number 4 on the board. And so he finishes out fairly strong, and he shuts out the Braves. He gives up 4 to San Francisco, 4 to Houston, and then shuts out, but it's not a complete game. Shuts 8 innings. What a bum. Against the Padres to end the season on October 1st. And then they go into the playoffs, and his numbers in the 81 postseason, I have in front of me, 3-1 with a 2.21 ERA and 40 innings pitched. And other than in my lifetime, that kind of a run, the only one that I would say eclipse it is the great one that Madison Bumgarner did. That I don't think I'll ever see that again in my lifetime. But what was that, 2000? Was that 14? I believe.
Yeah.
But all in all, like, he was just an absolute machine. And in Game 3 of the World Series against the Dodgers versus the Yankees, against the Yankees, he stumbled in the first couple of innings and was going to get pulled, and he talked Lasorda into leaving him in, and he ended up not only finishing the game but getting the win, shutting down the Yankees after there was a big discussion on the mound. So I'm going to step aside and give you time to kind of react to all that 1981 because you lived it. What say you?
As I said earlier, you early part of that season, and you watch him game, and you never. The one thing about him that I will always remember, he is probably pound for pound the hardest working pitcher I've ever seen. I've never seen someone earn every strike like he does. And to me, my most memorable moment was that game 3, because I've always said, and I said it to this day, when we talk about like fantasy pitchers and who's good, who's bad, so on and so forth,
right,
is what do you do as a pitcher when everything's against you? You're having a lousy game. Who are you in these moments? And the fact that Tommy Lasorda comes out, because I watched it, and I watched them argue. They were going back and forth, and he keeps telling them, he's like, no, it's time for you to go. And he's like, no, I've got this. He even does the two-handed, please, let me pitch this game. And I had never seen that before. I'd never seen a player argue with his coach about not being pulled. And the fact that Lasorda lets him go, he's shaking his head all the way back to the bench. He's like, I don't know about this at all. And then to watch him orchestrate, I guess you could say he shuts the Yankees down and gives the Dodgers, and the Dodgers batters come out and give him 5 runs and they win. That's where that's where he is. That's his height. To me personally, that's his pinnacle. That's what a great one is when you look bad and you snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat, and that's what he did. And that I think that's the only time I've really seen that. I've never seen it since. I've seen pitchers gut it out, but this was different. He didn't panic. That's always one thing about him. He's always cool under pressure. He didn't sweat under pressure. He figured out of it.
Nowadays, they always call it a slow heartbeat or can slow the game down or whatever, right?
Right.
Back then, we always heard the term ice water in the veins, right? It's essentially the same thing, just different way to look at it. But he just what was so magical about him as a player. Now, you put aside the part that he was the first Mexican player, and that's a huge deal. And I get the fandom, and I can understand that if you're watching. I'm trying to think of like if you're an American, you saw an American go over and all of a sudden dominate, like the English Premier League, right? Something that we're not known to be. And and someone goes over and just has an incredible, then I could see. The problem is most of the sports that we're interested in, we're very good at, right? There's not a lot that you could, I mean, I'm sure there's sports that people are interested in, but not as a country as a whole, right?
Right.
So don't at me with badminton or something. Nobody watches that crap. Yeah. I'm talking about like something that people are really interested in. And you look at it, but as him, just watching him, even later on, and he won 2 World Series. He's just credited for the one, but he did get the second ring. So he was on the 88 Dodgers. He just wasn't on. He never made the postseason roster because he had shoulder injury. And the tail end of his career was nothing but riddled with injuries. But he was a thinking man's pitcher. If you're talking about someone who was literally a pitcher, he did not blow you away. It was not like watching Nolan Ryan in those days, right? It was a guy, different repertoire, but it would be like to me, the closest thing that I can tell someone who might be a little younger on the Gen X side or remembers 90s baseball, if you were to compare Greg Maddux to Roger Clemens, right? He was not a guy that overpowered you, but he places pitches in a totally different repertoire. But Fernando Valenzuela, first of all, he was usually a horse. You could usually go out there. In fact, his nickname was El Toro, the Bull, right?
Mhm.
He was, well, first of all, he was built like a damn bull, but he would go out there and he ate innings. He ended up with 173 wins against 153 losses, a 3.54 ERA, and a WAR of just 41.5. He's on that cusp, and you heard Rich mention in the clip that I played, of arguments of being voted in the players committee, the veterans committee, on whether or not he belongs in the Hall of Fame one day. As much as I love Fernando and loved everything he's about, and by the way, I've been to the Hall of Fame. He's in the Hall of Fame, just like Pete Rose and Barry Bonds. There is a huge display called Fernando Mania that you can go over and then get lost in that, especially if you grew up in that era. But to be immortalized, one of the greatest, he just wasn't that. If you told me that from 81 to 86, and then for whatever reason he couldn't ever play again, they might have voted him in by now. But the problem is, the longer he played, and he ended up playing into the late 90s, he wasn't that great of a pitcher. But you could rely on him if you had him on your roster to go eat innings. That's one thing you could say. And was it 80s? Yeah, 86. He signed the largest contract at the time for a starting pitcher, or for a pitcher at the time. So 3 years, just over $5 million. I got the number somewhere. I think it was 5.5, which I know today is laughable, but it was a big deal back then. And so this was not a run-of-the-mill guy that had one good year. I think that's the big thing. I want people who didn't watch him, who didn't grow up. This is not just some guy that had one good year. This was a guy that had a very good career. I just don't know if it's Hall of Fame. Am I wrong? What say you?
I batted those numbers too, and you got to remember, I'm one of those kids that got caught up in the mania, and I always think I always think of his entire career being that 1981, 81, 82 years.
Right.
My emotions say I can't believe he's not in the Hall of Fame. But
see, I'm right there, and that's why I get why Rich said what he said, because Rich grew up a Dodger fan, and he's a Mexican American. Like, I get it. There's some guys you just root in. And you're like, I don't give a damn if he belongs there or not. I want him in there. So I get that part of it. But anyways, continue.
But unfortunately, he's a great one that stuck around too long. I wish he would have just left the game earlier, and then a lot of these numbers would be a lot better. And then, I don't think we'd be talking about this. But he stuck around too long. There's an old adage: you stay around too long just to see yourself become the butt of your own jokes. And that's what kind of happened to him, in the sense, numbers-wise, is how that. And his numbers are pedestrian. And if the Hall of Fame judges you by your numbers, no, I couldn't vote him in.
What it really reminds me of, and there's a lot of names you could throw out there, so I won't go through all that. He reminds me of a great tailback that had about 4 good years, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Around for another 5 or 6 and was averaging 2 yards a carry. And so the people who vote him in are going to look like the entire number, but those of us who are fans, like, yeah, but that was a bad dude at that. You'll pick and choose a couple of years, especially those that play fantasy. You're like, man, I remember when that guy literally carried me to titles. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me that it wasn't. I guess the biggest thing I wanted to lay out in this is that for people who remember him and remember in the 90s, he wasn't a Brady Anderson. It wasn't just 1 year where you're like, what the hell happened afterwards, right? Remember Brady Anderson came on the scene for the Orioles, hit 51 home runs 1 year, and that was like the only year he was ever worth the day. It was like the only year he did steroids. I don't know. I don't know what happened that year. They weren't testing for him. He might as well have kept doing them. But anyways, that's the biggest question I think we'll have. It would not shock me if down the road, and I'm talking about a decade or so down the road, if they eventually vote him into the Veterans Committee, because there are guys that get voted in, and they have a couple of different Veterans Committee. I forget what they call the one, but there's one that they only vote once it's like every 5 to 7 years, something like that. And they only vote in a few, if that, and they don't really base it on numbers. These guys are basing it on what a guy brought to the game. If you're basing it on that and you bring him into the Hall of Fame, we'll say 20 years from now, I can see that. If you want to tell the story of why baseball was so big to that community at that time, and then of course grew off of that into this day. To this day, if you meet someone from Southern California with any kind of Latino descent, they're probably a Dodger fan, and they may not know it, but they're a Dodger fan because their parents loved Fernando Valenzuela.
Exactly.
They might tell them, I don't know why. They may not even remember, but that's why, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. While you were talking, I was thinking back to the gentleman we listened to earlier, and he's basically correct. And I validated what he said, but I do have to. I am going to make a little quip, a little bit of an argument to him, just a small one. Back when the Dodgers first got there, they built the stadium. They played the first few years. There's a gentleman named, and he used to come to he's a scout. He's the one who discovered Valenzuela. He's the one who went to Mexico and got him. His name was Michael Biastro. The owner of the Dodgers at the time said to him, literally came up to him and said, "Find me a Spanish Sandy Koufax." Told him that to his face. He begged him. He goes, "Well, I don't know. There's not too many Sandy Koufaxes in the world." He goes, especially a Spanish one, but I will look for you. My little bit of argument to this gentleman is the fact that you had the owner of the Dodgers acutely aware that there was a problem with fan attendance, that the ELA was not coming to the games. And if you have the owner of the Dodgers aware of that, there must have been at least enough of a level of pushback for the Dodgers coming like they did to LA to worry them that they were looking for a Spanish Sandy Koufax. And I just wanted to put that in just as a little bit of argument to him. I mean, I wish he were here. I'd love to hear his response to what I just said, but I think all I was saying is I think a little bit more pushback because of what happened in the 50s, but it wasn't as much anger as it sometimes presented to be. That's where he is correct. People still were Dodgers fans. They just weren't.
I think also, and I don't mean to speak for him, but I think also, I think one of his points was you could have made that argument in the early 1960s. I don't know if you could have made the argument by 1981, right?
Fair enough.
Because it was such a big sport in the country of Mexico, and you had so many fans that were already. It's funny. I talked to a guy the other day from there were two guys that came into work. One was from the Dominican, the one was from Venezuela, and we were all sitting around talking baseball. And I asked them, because I was curious. I said, "Well, how big is baseball to y'all compared to, like, I don't know, soccer? Like, I don't know enough about it." And they're all like, "No, baseball. That's it." It said, "You don't play soccer, you play baseball, and your parents only want you to play baseball. They don't want you anything to do with any soccer or anything else." Now, some of them will eventually make it in other sports, but that's essentially where we're now Mexico's a little split because they do love soccer down there, but baseball, it's right there, right? And I think his point was by the time you hit the early 1980s, the fans were not staying away. Because what he was saying is that he was going to a lot of Dodger games at the time, and he saw many people that look like him, right? And I believe he was going to the games into the 1970s, like, early to mid 1970s. So this predates Valenzuela. But you know how people will run with something like that, because who knows who's writing these articles? The people writing these articles may have been born in 2002. You know what I mean? And they think, you think but you don't really know if you were there. That's why I always lean on the people who were actually there, as opposed to, it's great to look up stuff in the history books, no matter what the topic is. But if you're fortunate enough to be next to someone who's actually there, you need to pick their brain, because they were there if they were paying attention. I mean, you might run into a guy who was out there. I don't know, man. The damn Rams were rocking and rolling. I was going to Rams games. But that's the thing about Valenzuela, to me, is that he became an icon. He won a championship. He technically got the second championship. They never acknowledge it like on any of his pages. He got a second ring. He was on the 88 team. He just couldn't pitch in the playoffs because of an injury. I can remember when I went to the ring ceremony in Atlanta in 2022 after the World Series title, seeing all kinds of guys. Why is this guy getting a damn ring? Like, you couldn't even remember him being on the team. Like, oh yeah, you'd look and go, oh yeah, he pitched 2 innings. A lot of people forget Spencer Strider won a damn World Series with the Braves. He got a ring because he pitched in September. I want to say it was somewhere between 2 and 4 innings. But I remember standing out there and like, what is he doing out there? I'm looking and I go, oh yeah. So I'll put a bow on this, because I think we've covered most of what. Although I've got to know what took them till 2014 to put Fernando Valenzuela into the Mexican Baseball Hall of Fame. What the hell was that? There's got to be some bureaucracy that blocked that. There's only, because I'm gonna tell you right now, I went through.
I'll tell you the dirty secret. I'll tell you the dirty secret of that one. You have to remember the time when he played. There were 2 leagues in Mexico, and I can't remember his name. The names of the 2 leagues escape me. He played in the one, and what happened is when he went to the Dodgers, the one league basically bought the other league, and the league that bought the other one was the one he played against. And I've always said that when that happened, they kind of swept him under the rug down in Mexico until he became a big star in America.
Well, here's the thing, is that I thought maybe it had something to do with the fact that he gained his fame in Major League Baseball. But then I went through, and there were a bunch of guys that played, eventually played a little bit of Major League Baseball. But the only big name outside of Fernando Valenzuela in the Mexican Baseball Hall of Fame was a guy by the name of Roy Campanella. And if you're a Dodger fan from way back when, you know him. And of course, he might have been put in because of sympathy. But Fernando Valenzuela should have been put in. He should have been put in the fall of 1981. They should have rubber stamped that and said, "You're in, baby. I don't give a damn if you do anything else the rest of your life. You are in our Hall of Fame." That's absurd. He retires in 97, and 17 years later, he finally gets in the Hall of Fame.
Well, in the end, I guess you'll have to ask the league down in Mexico why they did. Why they waited so long.
I would love to corner one of them on the air. Thank you from Braves Country. We want to talk to you about something. They'll take you so damn long. Okay.
Oh, I'm sure that it would revolve around something about pride and something like that, to that effect.
He was born in Navajo, Mexico, went to high school there. So I don't get it, but I found it very, very strange that it took him that damn long. You got any last words before we walk out of here?
The only thing I was going to say, if you look through the halls of my high school to give you how much of a mania it was, it didn't matter if you were a boy. Even the girls followed him and loved him and had T-shirts. And having that Dodgers gray and that that powder blue that they wore back in the day, and those uniforms. Your high schools were covered with those colors. Everybody had that in common. It was the water cooler talk with the adults. It's what we talked about in the schoolyard the next day. And his impact on how people related to each other. That mania as a country brought us together for those years. And the only other aspect of his play is that other Spanish-speaking countries were listening and watching his games. And I do believe he had an influence with later players that you would see come from places like the Dominican Republic, Chile, other South American countries. Players that you see playing in the MLB are playing in the MLB because their countries became interested and wanted to play baseball like Venezuela.
Yeah, I guess I'll leave you with this. Though I don't think he's a Hall of Famer, I would never have the pushback that I had with Harold Baines. So if they put him in the Hall of Fame, I would understand it, because though his numbers just fall short. I mean, you don't even have 200 wins, and I feel like that's the litmus test today.
Yep.
But 173 wins back in the 80s going into the 90s, that's really low number. I mean, that's why his WAR is so low.
Yeah.
But it's more of the fact that when I look at him and you look at the WAR that he had in 81, in 82, let me see, 85, 86, even 87, he had 5 really great years. It's just not long enough for a baseball Hall of Fame. It's long enough for an NFL running back maybe, but it's not long enough for a baseball Hall of Fame. But if they ever put him in, I could nod on the fact, because I was living in that era and understood what he meant to the entire Mexican baseball community. I could tip the cap, and you know what? I'm not pushing back on this. But by his numbers, if you did not give me his name and you just put across his numbers, I'm going to go, nah. But I'll tell you what, he could be in the Hall of Pretty Good, and he should be in the Hall of Fame. It's not listed, and I don't know. I'm assuming that I don't know enough about the Dodgers, but they did retire his number 34, a few years back. And it is interesting that no one had ever worn his number since then. So that right there tells me the level of respect, because someone probably said, I don't know if you want to wear 34, boss man. You're going to have a lot of Valenzuela fans mad at you. So it's cool that they retired him. I don't know if they don't have one, but I don't see anything listed of him being in a Los Angeles Dodger Hall of Fame. That seems odd to me. I would think the Dodgers would have a Hall of Fame. I mean, maybe I'll have a chance to look that up down the road, but it's not listed. They only have it listed as him being in the Mexican Professional Baseball Hall of Fame is what they actually call it. But if they do create one, and why the hell haven't they? He's got to be on the first ballot. It's got to be him. It's got to be Sandy Koufax. I mean, there's a lot of players, Pee Wee Reese, Duke Snyder. You go into Jack Robinson. I mean, we go on and on and on. But that first, depending on how big of a class you put in, I would have him into the Hall of Fame.
Yep.
Because if they don't have one yet, they're going to have to induct like 50 dudes the first time. Man. Think about how long the Dodgers have been around. All right. Me and Doug are going to get together off air and talk about the next one, but we'll be doing a Once Upon a Pastime really soon. Obviously not next week because it's Thanksgiving, but we will catch y'all next time, and have a great evening as we tip the cap once again to Fernando Valenzuela. Fernando Mania, one of my favorite things growing up as a kid.